I'd like to talk a little bit about how um, certain topics show that I include in the syllabus, in the Women in World History syllabus or Women in Gender and World History syllabus, how I teach them and how one can teach them. To provide a little bit of depth to say, well, here's a syllabus that I devised, and you should just go look at it and do, you're kind of on your own. But the syllabus starts with a unit. The first unit that's presented in the syllabus is about women in the Islamic Empire, or women in the Islamic world, really. And it's done by two scholars who are historians of women in Islam. And Islam is a topic that if you're going to be teaching world history, you're going to be talking about the rise and the spread of Islam. It's an important topic in women's world history and women in gender world history. It's an important topic anyway in world history. So this is a unit that you could use, as I do in the syllabus, to teach about women in Islam, but it's also a unit that you could use to just teach about Islam. Again, oftentimes you'd be teaching with a textbook or with something that might kind of cover things quite broadly, or you could provide in your class, you could provide a general introduction on Islam. But then because the issues of gender and Islam are so much in the forefront today, because there's so much misunderstanding about this, to just focus in for the kind of original sources you're going to be using to focus in on things that have to do with women is not really diverting. It's not really saying, oh, it's kind of going off in some other direction. You really get at the heart of the kind of sources that are important for talking about Islam at all. So in the unit on women in the Islamic world from 600 to 1600, there are the kind of sources that are important for your students to understand about if they're going to understand anything about Islam. So there are sections from the Quran, a couple of them, the surah on women, kind of the major things that so students can say, read, here's what the Quran says about women in several different places. There's selections from the Hadith, those kind of accounts of what other things that Muhammad said that the Prophet Muhammad said that are not in the Quran. So another central source in understanding about Islam. There are also poems by a woman who is a Sufi poet, so one of those mystical or early poets of Islam, Rabia, very short poems that your students can read then, so that you can introduce through these two poems something about Sufism, this mystical thread that goes from Islam from the 8th century on. So there's another important thing to, again, whether you're teaching about women Islam or you're teaching about Islam in general, to have your students understand something about Sufism is very important. And also then, included as part of this is visual sources. And the visual sources that are there are three. One of them is a madrasa, one of them is a tomb, and one of them is a bath, some public baths that were all paid for and patronized and endowed by women, by royal women who had quite a bit of money. So these are important kinds of buildings within Islam, schools and baths and mosques that were paid for by women. It goes against students' stereotypes about what women could do. They sort of understand, oh, Muslim women are all shut away in harems or such like that. They're certainly not out there sponsoring big public buildings. It goes against their understandings about the kind of economic agency that women had in Islam. And they're also really interesting buildings in and of themselves. So you can think about how did Islam shape the built environment, what sort of buildings are important. Again, so that with the focus here, all of the sources happen to be about women. But through this, your students, if you're using this for a general world history class, through this, your students will get introduced to the Quran, the Hadith, Sufism and Sufi poets, and the built environment of Islam. So mosques and schools. And in a relatively short, they're all quite short. They all have annotations by the people that put together this particular teaching module. And then they could be useful then in a wide variety of ways.